Hello, and welcome to the Dolby Institute Podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, please head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Welcome to our continuing coverage of the 2023 Academy Awards. In our last episode, we interviewed each of the nominees in the Best Sound category. And just like last year, we have compiled interviews with the nominees in the Best Cinematography category. And for the first time, I am very pleased to say that we have somehow managed to juggle everyone's very busy production schedules. And today we are having new conversations with all 5 of the nominees in the Best Cinematography category. So I hope you find this episode particularly helpful, whether you are an Oscar voter as an Academy member, or if you are a fan participating in your annual office pool. This episode will hopefully give you a much better idea of what to watch for as you get to the cinematography category on your ballot. Here are the nominees that we're speaking with in alphabetical order by film. James Friend for All Quiet on the Western Front, Darius Khondji for Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, Mandy Walker for her work on Elvis, Roger Deakins with Empire of Light, and finally, Florian Hoffmeister with Tar. Once again, we will also have an index with time codes for each of these segments in our show notes for your convenience. All right, so obviously, this is a very big episode with brand new interviews with all 5 of these cinematographers. So let's jump right in. First up is All Quiet on the Western Front. Here is cinematographer James Friend, who is celebrating his very first Academy Award nomination.
Ich hab Angst vor dem, was kommt.
Du musst jetzt tapfer sein. Für die es nicht geschafft haben.
I want to talk with you about thematically kind of the arc of Paul Bäumer and his friends. They start off so, youthful and optimistic. There's that first sequence kind of at the rally with the, where they're getting excited to go off to war. And then obviously their arc is the story, which is we follow them as they're struggling through the brutal reality of this conflict. And obviously the way you're photographing them and lighting them and the way they appear in the film changes drastically as they go through this journey. So can you tell me about that aspect of the cinematography and how you light, how you lit them and how you composed your shots with them to kind of reinforce this narrative of them getting deeper and deeper into this, hellscape of the war?
We were very conscious about that as far as kind of visual storytelling. So we actually, that was one of the last scenes we ever shot because we wanted it to be as kind of bright and optimistic as humanly possible. And so we shot that at the very beginning of May, right at the end of the schedule. And we shot on large format again, and we were very conscious to try and keep all of our heroes, if there is such a thing, all of our, our boys all in one frame and try to really fill that, widescreen aspect ratio of these are, they're all on equal footing. They've all, everyone's got everything to lose, essentially. So it does really directly contrast any other point of the film because it's one of the only scenes that's set in an area that hasn't been truly affected by the Great War. It was, you see kind of a family vibe and setting and kind of lifestyle essentially, and also that sense of real innocence. We wanted them to be as charming and as just as sort of uncorrupted as humanly possible. So and weirdly, there was a bit of a happy accident where we were having slight issues with some of the lenses, no through fault of the rental house, but just the way I decided to photograph some sequences. And we found this set of lenses from Arri, which are 65Ss, which are just really soft and they're just very forgiving. And I put them on the camera and they just suddenly look like beautiful sort of portrait lenses, old school portrait lenses. And they just really worked for that scene. So I said, oh, yeah, let's shoot this scene or this sequence on those lenses. And it worked really nicely. If it be a kind of subliminal thing but for me, it was definitely a happy accident, to be perfectly honest.
One of the things that really struck me also about the film is it's so intimate with the guys in the trenches, and it gives you such a sense of what that style of warfare must have been like. And I think, I know almost half of the film takes place in the trenches, and it was quite an extraordinary set that you had to work with, where this interminable battle plays out. But in terms of the trenches and that set, can you talk about, like, I can imagine that this was both a great gift and an enormous challenge for you in terms of the amount of time that you had to spend in there and the conditions that you were shooting in.
So they commandeered this plot of land, which is set in an old Soviet airbase called Milovice, and it was, it was a two runways like that, which we had access through on both sides, and we commandeered the middle area and turned it into no man's land, and we built the French trench and the German trench, and the sun, because it was perfectly south facing, the sun rose. If you were to point a camera completely down the line of no man's land, the sun would rise slap bang in the crosshair. So it just couldn't have been any better. And the second I kind of did my sun path, I was like, we have to shoot here. And some of the locations that other people were sort of really batting for, they were at kind of that angle. And I was like, and the sun was terrible. And, I was kind of pulling my hair out, and I thought, am I going to lose this battle? But we managed to get past that, stage of the process. And then Christian Goldbeck, and his incredible team just gave the whole no man's land the relief and the not only the mounds but also the craters that give it that sort of topography. So it was incredible, because we tried to give the best version of a 360 set as you can imagine, but actually it was a 3-walled set. So the north side, where there was a runway, mainly because I didn't ever want to point the camera that way because of front light. We had our entire unit base and all of our trailers and all that kind of stuff, which I sort of plonked there, or managed to convince production to plonk there, because I knew that if we were off site, getting actors to and fro location would have just been, suicide for the production. So we plonked them there to make sure that they could get to set quickly and service the production, but also it forced us never to look there. So that meant that we could always shoot against the light. We were always backlit, essentially, and we could predict our day. So whenever anyone turned up in the morning, we were looking east, and then we would look south, and then we would look west. And each scene, we could just plot our coverage that way. And it enabled us to be as backlit as humanly possible. And then when we got inside the trenches, obviously it became a slightly different kettle of fish, because it was, you're in a muddy corridor, so you could kind of look at anywhere, but we still had the ability to sort of control it to a certain degree, and that was great. That was fun, but it was bloody challenging. It was really, really challenging. It was, you walk 10 paces and you've got so much mud on your shoes that you're kind of carrying an extra sort of like half person, because it's just so, well, these guys, they had to fight and live in these conditions, where we got to go home and have a shower and a bath at the end of the day. But it was tough to film in, and it was a real credit to the cast and the crew and the extras, the supporting artists. It came across in the performance as well and everything. I think a lot can be said for just being carted off to a comfy trailer, at the end of every setup, and But our cast, they truly lived in it.
Another way that you guys really gave us the sense of what it was like, in that warfare was, during the battle sequences when, they would be charging forward, you and Edward didn't, or Edward and the picture editors, they seemed to not, this was not a particularly cutty film. Like, these were long shots. You follow along, you really feel like you're there with everything that's happening. So obviously that's a huge challenge for you in terms of the choreography, the pyrotechnics, and all that. Can you talk a little bit about designing those sequences and shooting those long tracking shots during the battles?
A lot of it came from the pre-production in the sort of hotel room beforehand. And when we were kind of boarding it out, we were constantly asking ourselves, when do we want to cut? As an audience member, when would we like to see a cut? And then also as a filmmaker, when would we like to cut? But then also, when do we have to cut because we don't have the resources to keep going? And shooting those big stabilized shots, especially on the LF, your field of view is pretty enormous. So 400 extras or 200 extras or however many you have, they don't go that far because you can't just have everyone running at once. You've got people overtaking each other, people dying. And, very quickly on a long take, you run out of people. It's quite surprising. And I like to err on the sort of wider end of the glass anyway, or the field of view at least. So that becomes even shorter. And I think everything, you just suddenly invite more things to go wrong. So you've got explosions going off in the background and, pyro going off in the foreground. And it only takes for something to miss time or a stuntman to get something wrong or, the myriad of things that could go wrong. And it did go wrong. And the whole time I'm staring at the sun path saying, well, the best time for this scene to be shot is in like 20 minutes. And I know it's a 40-minute reset. So everything else from that point onwards, I'm just thinking the quality of the photography is going to get worse and worse and worse. And sometimes praying for a cloud, just sat there staring through a pan glass at the cloud. And it's pretty nerve-wracking. And then when you end up with this perfect storm and it all happens, and you're just really grateful when everyone watches back the last take and you kind of go, yeah, we've got that now.
You talked about storyboarding and designing those sequences. Were there some experimentations that you tried that didn't work out? Like I read somewhere about the wire cam and that was something that you explored using, but it didn't work out. Can you talk about that?
When the battlefield started to sort of take place or take shape, we were, I was really scratching my head about how to move the camera through the environment without, leaving big tire marks and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things I thought about was a wire cam so that we could sort of chase behind people and, and I knew it was quite a cumbersome bit of kit and quite a, an involved piece of equipment. But I just wanted, for my own sanity, I just wanted to kind of dismiss it and at least experiment it and say that I had experiment with it and just say that I'd just done my due diligence. So we myself and my operator drove to Berlin and we went to this wonderful place with these wonderful Wirecam guys, and we just tried to do just a simple move as far as following behind someone, behind a soldier that would just move and move and move, and trying to do it manually, and operate the wheels and someone else essentially as a grip trying to move the camera. And it didn't have the sort of reactionability. It wasn't quite reactive enough, and it didn't feel organic. It felt very, if you were trying to do a programmed move where you could just follow something in profile and just whiz along at the speed of a race car, it's a fantastic tool, but it just didn't work for us. And so through a lot of toing and froing, and I ended up building or convincing the team to build 3 roads in the set, all parallel to each other, so we could the actors could run on one and we could run on another, and if it was too fast, we could be on some kind of tracking vehicle with the stable eye that would just we wouldn't see the tracks basically, and it works.
I feel like you and Edward made a conscious decision that everything with the camera work had to actually adhere to the laws of physics. You know, we don't have crazy shots like you commonly see in war films, like with following a bomb down from the bomber on detonating into the field. Like everything actually makes sense according to laws that we understand in the world, and so you never get pulled out of it. I take it. I'm sure that was a conscious decision that you and Edward made.
I would say that was one of our most conscious decisions, to be perfectly honest. We always wanted the audience to feel like that they were in the war and a soldier on the battlefield. So we extremely, well, just consciously, just never wanted to take them out from that sort of objective sort of viewpoint, really. So the lens choice and the camera format was always considered to be, if you were a soldier running across running next to our leading man, and you were to look over to him, that would be the approximate field of view that you would witness. And very rarely we cut to aerials. I think we do, once or twice in the film, actually. And one is where we cut back to see the battlefield completely destroyed, which was, it was supposed to be a decision that was made where when you go to that view, that you're consciously not a soldier anymore. You're an audience member. And the other one was one where we suddenly pick up with Paul Balmer, where we're following him on a drone essentially, but we wanted an explosion to essentially completely engulf the camera, which we did. So we always still wanted it to feel like the audience was on the battlefield, and even though it's re-establishing the audience, and it's not just within that person's space, it was still supposed to feel immersive, like you could always get hit by a bullet at any time. And in the same way that Saving Private Ryan just did so extremely well with the directing, photography, and sound design, and just every aspect of the film. But I remember being in the cinema and watching that, and when you heard a bullet go past your head and Dolby whatever, you felt like kind of ducking, and it was shocking. It was terrifying. And that was kind of part of the feeling we were, I suppose, just trying to capture. That you once you're running across a battlefield, there's no escape. You've either got to run that way and get shot by your commanding officer, or you've just got to run that way and get shot by the enemy. And there's just no winning. It was supposed to feel as helpless and as kind of lost as humanly possible.
Frankly, something that I really loved about the look of the film was, the contrast between the guys in the battlefield and in the trench. And then of course you cut to the armistice negotiations or the crazy generals, and those sequences have an entirely different look and feel. And can you talk a little bit about designing that contrast and thematically what that says to the audience?
Well, it's not in the book, but obviously it's in history, and I think that's the main reasoning behind it, because the audience occasionally needed that. I think they needed they needed a bit of relief, but also they needed a bit of context to where everyone was or is, and that whole kind of sequence felt like the perfect vehicle to re-establish kind of sanity and humanity, and and the egos of kind of old men talking and young men dying, and also being such a bizarre sort of juxtaposition to a battlefield. These train carriages, which were very lavish, sort of silk wallpaper and beautiful glass and, wonderful food and champagne and all this kind of stuff. But it was a pleasure to sort of read as and also sort of designing it. So we slightly we oversized the carriage a little tiny bit, but all of those sequences were also shot on the 65 because I wanted them to feel. I didn't want the audience to be conscious of it, but I wanted them to feel the kind of nature of the photography kind of subconsciously, I suppose. We went out into the forest and I shot a load of plates all at different times of day, and we actually built an LED wall down at either side of the train set on Bardo Studios, which is really one of the first times I'd ever experimented with LED walls. And it enabled us to control the time of day and all that kind of stuff, and not just be like a black hole outside. But they were really sort of gratifying sequences to shoot. Very hard because even though we're on a big old sound studio, the sets were tiny, and we were navigating it with a quite a large camera and a large format. And also, we actually had more principal characters in those scenes than we did in some of the trench scenes. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes we would normally just have like 5 or 6 people in the trench scenes, but in the train carriages, sometimes we would have like 10 or 11, people that all had lines of dialogue, all sat around a table. It was very close quarters. So it was a challenge because we also had to build the lighting into the environment as well, very much into the set. And that was a great collaboration with Christian Goldbeck, our production designer, and we were constantly sort of on each other's shoulders, thinking, how are we going to do this? And we were, I like to think we were a great team, and we got through it together. Yeah.
Were you involved with the Dolby Vision grade on this film, which I thought looked spectacular?
Yeah, very much so. So Andrew Daniel, who's the colorist who resides at Goldcrest in London, and I'd worked with him. I think I'd worked with him for about 15 years, and we came up together through sort of television drama and very sort of indie movies and things like that. But he's great. He's really part of my my team, and I wouldn't kind of know what to do without him really. And I ended up shooting a load of camera and sort of costume tests with the cast in natural light, because I thought that that's our main kind of language, even if I were to light it or whatever. But our natural light is our kind of go-to look. And I sent it to him, and I was in Prague and he was in London, and we did a live grade session and we played around with it all. And we created a lot there and then, and we couldn't actually afford live grade at the time. So I had a conversation with the producers where, and they were so supportive, so supportive. But they said financially we can either have live grade on set, or alternatively we can have or shoot certain sequences on the Alexa 65. And naturally, I went with the Alexa 65 because I thought that that's, is part of the, this real sort of language of the movie. So Andrew and I created this LUT, which was extremely sort of dynamic and just very forgiving. And then we created an answering LUT for the Venice and for the Red. And we didn't really sort of deviate from that. And then we went into the DI process at the end, and it was a real journey because we had about a week before Christmas or something like that, and then it enabled us to break for Christmas and take a big step back and then revisit it. And it's a bit like I think every filmmaker has when they grade a picture. You kind of walk outside for a cup of coffee or whatever and walk back into the DI suite, and then you go, oh my God, what have we been doing? It looks terrible, or it looks great, but we had sort of a couple of weeks to sort of process it all, and we went back and we thought, oh God, what have we done? Have we pushed it too far? Or I think everything all just really sort of simmered down into, it just reduced into going back to as naturalistic as humanly possible, and really stripping back any of the kind of looky grades that we did and things like that. And Andrew's brilliant at that, because, I described to him what I want at the very beginning. Sometimes he will say to me, well, this isn't what we kind of spoke about, because we've got that kind of relationship. And Ed is also very good at that as well. But we will always push everyone, and then we'll realise where our sort of breaking point is, and then we'll come back and reconvene. And the film kind of ended up where it was, where I'm the most proud of it being. But it was a real collaborative effort. Some very long hours in the grade as well. Very, very, very long hours. Just get it all done, and constantly revising and just trying to find the right look for each scene, and what worked for each environment. On set, we didn't really have the luxury of always monitoring in HDR. So to see the film in a sort of quiet environment, with that colour and with that contrast and with that kind of luminance level, was pretty striking, really. Because it makes you very aware of the power of the Dolby Vision image, but also the power of how the cameras can really capture these images at the same time. And you kind of go, wow, well, did I shoot that? Wow, Jesus. It was remarkable, really remarkable, to the point where it also kind of changes the way you photograph, and I'm used to it now as well. I'm so sort of used to shooting in HDR that I'm always very mindful of anything that's too like candles, you need to be extremely careful of, and firelight, and especially with sequences where we're heavily reliant on those things in this film. But it's an education which I've been really pleased and proud to be sort of part of. But yes, I was very, very much part of it all. And and to the point where when you suddenly watch an SDR grade, you feel like you've been robbed of something all of a sudden. You kind of go, oh, it's the magic of that gun. Yeah.
You said that working in Dolby Vision and HDR has actually had some effect on the way that you shoot. And I'm curious for you to elaborate on that. Can you talk a little bit more about what has changed about your shooting style as a result of having Dolby Vision and HDR?
Fundamentally, not a huge amount, because I came sort of full circle on it. The first time I shot and graded in HDR, it was a shock to my eye, and like anything, I suppose, anything that's different. Like the first time you go from looking from a print, viewing a print to a DCP, there's a natural jump, and sometimes you feel like you need to get used to it. But I just landed back to kind of where my general principles of photography were anyway, and what I've kind of empowered myself with, instead of, if a candle looks 3 times brighter and you want to put it as a highlight in the back of shot, instead of being scared of it, embrace the dynamic range of the camera to actually pull it down and balance the image to where the eye and the brain isn't scared of sort of where to go. You need to kind of trust the human awareness to kind of go to where the story suits best. And when you just open up an image, it can sometimes look a bit intimidating, but with a bit of manipulation, as soon as you understand how to manipulate it, it's a real tool and actually a weapon that you can use.
Many thanks to James and the entire team behind All Quiet on the Western Front. Next up is Darius Khondji for his work on Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. This is his second Oscar nomination, as he goes for his first win. this film, the cinematography is so exquisite in Bardo, and I was mesmerized from the very first frame. I love the opening of the film with the person in the desert leaping into the air, and we see the shadow extend in front of us, and the person is trying to become airborne. But I'm curious about that. It's such a heightened, stylized experience right from the beginning of the film. How did you and Alejandro talk about that opening as a way to set the film, set the tone of the film? And then I'm just curious how you accomplished that shot.
It was Alejandro talked to me about this opening scene, and it was a very spiritual way. It was he didn't talk to me in a technical way at the beginning. He talked, about the feeling that we should have, and the feeling that the audience should have watching this scene. And it was, all the way during the film, it was a very spiritual, very mental approach to the for the look of the film. It was it needed to be, like something very deep inside, very feeling not only cerebral but like emotionally very, very strong. So this scene of the opening scene was a scene where I felt it was almost like in apnea, like where you grasping for air and you put your arms up, and it was more like a dream. Really, he described it to me like a dream he had, and I think I had similar dreams like that with with your hands when you see the landscape like this. And it was we had different discussions on it, but I remember then, and technically we scouted the desert. He showed me the different desert that he liked, and we looked at different ones, and we picked one that there was one that he liked particularly, and at a certain time of the day, at the very beginning of the very beginning of sunlight, when the daylight hits the whole desert, the morning, and then we scouted it, and we saw how we discussed it, how we're going to photograph it. We came with the part of our crew, and then we decided on photographing it with a drone, with a special drone, where we mounted a smaller version of our camera, a smaller reflex camera. We were shooting in VistaVision. The movie is shot in 70mm in VistaVision, but we decided we had to use a smaller Alexa called the LF, smaller version of it, which is still a very big gate for the film. And we photographed. We had a great crew, a drone pilot and a drone operator, and a very, very good. And we had them done. And then the first time it was done, it was not exactly the way we wanted it, the way Alejandro had really in mind. So we sent them back again to do it really. And then the second time it was a matter of really getting the shadows in the right direction. The shadow of the ground, of the little grass there was. So everything is Alejandro is very meticulous. He's one of the directors I work with who's one of the most meticulous and precise about what he had in mind, what he dreams of. He really wants it on screen, which is really wonderful for a cameraman. And this is how we did it, And then the rest was also a part of VFX, but it was all previously done on stage with our actor, with Silverio on stage, with Daniel Jimenez Cacho, that we put on wires on stage, and we put a light on him. We casted a shadow, and he had some captor on him, some receptors, on him, to analyze the movement of the human, of his movement with his action, with his real close, to see the movement. So the first time we did this on the stage in Churubusco, this old Churubusco stage in Mexico, I felt it was really much like an early movie. It was a movie Méliès thing. It felt very much very real, very organic. So we analyzed the shadow, and then we mapped the shadow on the.
That's so fascinating to me because, of course, like my first thought was like, okay, well, the shadow is CG, and you took the camera out, and but it's so organic. So of course, it makes sense that you actually shot the shadow portion live action as well. I know that there's so much, there's so much that's deceptively simple about the film. And another sequence that I wanted to ask you about, that one of my favorite sequences is when Silverio is walking down the street in Mexico City and people start to fall. And I read an interview with Alejandro. He was talking about this for him represented the people in Mexico who have disappeared over the decades. But then that sequence, it seems deceptively simple. Exterior Mexico City, daytime, shot. But then you end it with this time lapse that I understand was one of the most complicated scenes in the film to shoot. So tell us about that.
Alejandro about it, no? You did, right? Yes, it was a very complicated scene to do. The scene we shot in all the scene that we shot downtown Mexico with the people, with the extra, was emotionally very very powerful, very strong. When we photograph it, I remember Alejandro being very, very intensely captivated and focused on the way we were shooting it and the extras. He has an amazing sense of being able to gather all these things together. To have his mind clear in front of hundreds and hundreds of extras and the crew. It was a very, very intense shoot. And we had the reference of these photographers who has done this color work called Vivian Mayer.
Vivian Mayer, of course, sure, yeah.
The person that I work with, the color consultant, showed me this book that I knew her work, but he showed me this book at the beginning of the film. We share it with Alejandro together, the three of us, and we was a very inspiration for the light, for the quality of the daylight. Were very natural, very organic daylight on skin tone, but with a very special, something very twist with the color, but that still felt natural, without being too vintage and there was something very real, very true about the very transparent about the quality of light in her photograph that I wanted to feel. I wanted to have it with us in the back of our mind, and Alejandro and I we pursued this sense of color in the day exterior of the movie, and this is how we photographed this whole scene where people fall and all the scene that are previous to this scene where he walks in Mexico, downtown Mexico City, surrounded by buildings. This is the transparency of the air of the Vivian Mayer color photography that we had still in mind. I think that we work with our colorists, with Damian van der Kruisen after in post-production, in the color DI of the film. And then it was very intense. And we arrived to this Silverio arrived walking, and with all these people around arrive at this moment of the day, which is the eclipse, which was a bascule, like a swing of day into the darkness, which is very, very strong. Then we photographed all downtown. We mapped everything very precisely and very high quality, and then we use it later after in post-production. But we photographed him on stage in Churubusco in Mexico. We photographed him and we moved the crane with an amazing dolly operator, an amazing dimmer with a lights operator. So we put a big sunlight that we put on the crane, and we had it travel like the course. We analyzed the course of the sun above the buildings, and we cut with flags. We cut accordingly to the outline of the buildings. On the right side, we cut the light, as the light in timing, with the right timing, and it was cutting like this, and the light and the sun was going, and the light was with a crane was diving down in the distance. This is how we created the eclipse.
Amazing, a very old-fashioned approach.
very old-fashioned mixed with very modern technology.
Yes. I'm curious. You mentioned before shooting in 70 VistaVision, and then of course one of the things that is remarkable to me is it feels like a lot of the film is photographed in almost exclusively. It feels like wide angle lenses. So can you talk about that approach to the landing on the visual style of the film, and what did you gain by shooting the 70 millimeter VistaVision?
Yeah, the VistaVision we shot some tests, and the VistaVision was the first thing we decided to do to work with this camera, which is like a 70 millimeter camera, but it's a digital camera that is the same idea as the film. It's not exactly like the film camera. Of course, it's not like the film VistaVision, and not like the 70 mil, but it's the same idea, the same format, the same size in digital. And we wanted it because we wanted Silverio, the character, being very big on screen, very present. I was very drawn, and we were very drawn, actually, Alejandro and I, by the presence of the actor on screen and having the world mapped around him. Having his world, which whether it's downtown Mexico or the pyramid or the California dancing club, or even the more intimate scenes, the apartment. We wanted to have the feeling that the world was like you have a little bit. You have it on CinemaScope and anamorphic. When you shoot with old anamorphic lenses, it's a little bit of that feeling maybe. Except we capture a lot. And Alejandro loved these lenses, these wide angle lenses. Also, right from the beginning, he was his vision to photograph the film like this. It was very much already, or it was already in him, and it became mine as a cameraman. I like to embrace the vision of the director, what the director has in his mind, and then I walked in his path, in this part, very close to him. I mean, in all the film, but especially in here, I tried to understand how he wanted the character, and then we were together, we were working together, we were flying together. And it was wonderful. It was an amazing journey because it was once you start to feel what Alejandro how he wanted to tell this experience of his life, which is very, 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 very true, very real, even if it's very stylized and cinematic. It has so much truth and so much strength in it, that I needed to be very close to him. And that's how I felt. And I think we both felt the same way.
I love that you talk about it like a dance, like you and Alejandro were dancing, because the camera work is so beautiful and dynamic. And of course, it's my mind immediately goes to those long tracking shots, either in the California Club or the remarkable work that you did in the television studio. And can you just talk about that choreography and the movement and how you decided to move the camera through these spaces?
Yes, Alejandro works in a very musical way. He works a lot with timing, with a sense of timing and rhythm. He works like a composer. Like a conductor with music, with a band, which would be his band. I would be part of his band, close to him. And he directs like that. He needs our input also. He asks for input, but at the same time, he knows what he wants. He's very, very directive in what he wants to do. And he made the film, the rhythm of the film, the camera moves with a dolly grip in a very, very musical way, the camera operator in a very, very musical way. So it was exactly like dancing together. I felt I was dancing with him on the same path, but also like a band. I often felt we were a band together. I was playing for him with like a lead guitar, and it was a wonderful journey like this. It was very, it was very, very musical, and very choreographed. Every scene. It has to do also with the way the scenes were already he had conceived the scene, he had storyboarded and designed the scene, and he wanted the camera to be very choreographed, very designed. The shot, he wanted to feel like it's a continuous movement, like a river, like a tumultuous river, sometimes and sometimes very calm. But he wanted to feel around his actors, the camera being very, very in movement all the time, and that's how we little by little, I think we got into this his rhythm.
Well, it's perfect because, of course, Silverio is a filmmaker, so he would think in very, cinematic terms about telling his own story. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we often felt we were behind his eyes, we were behind his head. We were Silverio sometimes. Alejandro and I and the crew.
I know that we've only got a couple minutes left, but I'm curious. I would love to know, for you, the DI process. You mentioned working with the colorist before. How do you work with the colorist? How involved are you in the DI process? And I'm curious to know your thoughts about Dolby Vision.
Oh, I work with two type of colorists. I work with a color consultant, colorist, which normally you would call a DI. Not a DI, a DIT.
In production.
In production, like a DIT. But this DIT I work with, Gabriel, his name is Gabriel. Gabriel Colodny is more like he's also like a colorist in a way on set. We create together for the director like a lab that the director can consult at any time. He can come in the tent and watch the colorist and look at the scenes, how he wanted. So we have open book. We have like Vivian Maier or the surrealist painter Paul Delvaux, Chirico. We have all this in mind. We have looked at all this together, and we don't do literal. We don't go directly from painting or photograph, of course, but we have it always in the back of our mind. And the way we work is really like a lab. I call him colorist, but he's a DIT. I call him the art colorist, and he creates already the film, because I love film personally. I'm a big film lover, film star, Kodak lover, but I'm a film lover. But we create an image when we shoot. When I shoot digital, I want this person is very important for me, and the colorist, of course, who's going to do the final color. Like we have Damien van der Krussen, our colorist, who does all my film now. He's also very, very close to the right, and it's a very close process to color. I need to be able to be in touch with it. It's very important for me.
I'm so mesmerized by the sequence in the dance club in Silverio with his family there. And, again, wide angle lenses, long shots, hundreds of extras. I know that I read an interview with Alejandro where he said that this was in the middle of COVID. I think he said pre-vaccination. He said it was hot as hell in that room. And there was nowhere for you to hide anything because of the wide angle lenses. Talk about designing the look of that sequence.
Designing the look was my greatest lighting experience. I think one of my greatest. I have a few of them on this movie actually. Alejandro managed to make me have all these great challenges. But the California Dancing Club was prepared a lot ahead of time together. Alejandro showed me this club where he would love to shoot, and it was an old club that existed already in the golden age of Mexico, all these clubs of Mexico. And he told me about the ambience. We looked at pictures of reference pictures, and I gathered a lot of information and images of the time of what it was. Not because I wanted to reproduce necessarily how it was on time, but I wanted to understand more about it. I had no culture on this part of Mexican life, So I gathered a lot of information, and I put myself into the nights of Mexico of that time, of the color, of the temperature, the smell, the feeling of it. And it was very strong. So we designed the scenes ahead of time together with Alejandro. We scouted it a few times together. And we scouted with our gaffer and a dimmer operator and our dolly grip, the key grip and the dolly grip. And we designed the camera movement around the parkour or the walk of Silverio and his wife, and Lucia during in the club, meeting the various people of his life, his old friends and family and brother and sister and old friend. And it was an amazing experience because they all had their light, they all had their burst of loud coming on and off. It was really like writing a musical thing. Music thing was light. So this excellent dimmer operator Lucas from Berlin, who came from Berlin, who designed with us with our gaffer the lights. And Alejandro sometimes give us some hint of what he wanted on the color or the feel of it. So when he felt there was something to adjust, and then we did adjustment, but it was all together with the camera movement. This sequence, the camera and the light were working very much hand in hand, together around Alejandro with this camera, this capture of this large format camera.
Well, it's a remarkable sequence, and truly, there's so many things that we could talk about. I love the apartment. The look in the apartment is fantastic. It's a fantastic film. So congratulations to you on your Academy Award nomination. Darius,
thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure for me too. Thank you for a wonderful question.
Many thanks to Darius and the entire team behind Bardo. Next up is Elvis. Here is cinematographer Mandy Walker. This is Mandy's first Academy Award nomination, and notably, she is only the third woman in the history of the Oscars to get nominated for cinematography.
I just gotta be making the most of this thing while I can. This could all be over in a flash. We are the same, you and I. We are two odd, lonely children reaching for eternity.
Mandy, thank you so much for coming on the Dolby Podcast to talk with us about Elvis. I love this movie, and I've been so eager to sit down and have conversation with you about it.
Thank you, Glenn. And my pleasure to be here.
I think it's impossible to talk about this movie without talking about Austin Butler's extraordinary performance. And I want to just kind of start by asking you, as the cinematographer, what you feel your role is in enabling, an actor like Austin to give the kind of performance that he gives. Because I also know, watching the film, Baz Luhrmann he's not really a director who's going to put the camera on sticks 20 feet away from the actor and let you shoot with a long lens and just stay out of the way, right? So the camera's very dynamic. I think you've referred to it as dancing with the actor. How do you establish that relationship and enable that kind of performance?
Well, you're absolutely right. And for this film, that's why Baz gets me involved really early on. Like, I was there for Austin's audition workshop. Baz calls it a workshop. It was his first audition. And taking photos of him and kind of being near him with a camera. And it starts from that. So, when he was rehearsing his dance moves and his concert sequences, I was always there, and I was photographing it and then getting closer to him. And Baz has this plan where, we start with still cameras and then we get in with viewfinders and we get in with cameras. And so I wanted, one, to explore the angles and to work out the lensing, and because I was reproducing some of the concert footage exactly. And then two, just so he feels comfortable. I mean, with cameras being near him, and gets used to it, and gets used to we're going to be right in his face at a certain moment, or we're going to meet him when he slides across the stage, or we're going to be running around him. So it's important. I mean, I always feel like my job is to be very respectful of the actor's performance, because it is the most important thing in the movie. And I'm there to help that and help storytelling and to enhance it. And in this case, I was there, as you say, to dance with him. And it was so to work out ways of doing that and to explore. And so doing double duty, really, with him feeling comfortable as well.
But it's also true. I feel like most of the film you shot with multiple cameras. I mean, it's in some cases up to 5 cameras, which can be great for actor performances, but it complicates your life in terms of lighting and composition. So how do you strike that balance between, capturing everything you possibly can versus actually getting the look that you want?
Well, I think what I do is I always think about that when I'm lighting. And also when I'm talking for on this film, when I was going through the shots with Baz, and I'd say, well, can we do these two together because this is in the right direction for our lighting? I'd like to do this coverage later when I can get 3 cameras over here. So I really plotted out in my head, and I think that because I had a lot of pre-production on this movie for that reason, like because we had 93 days to shoot. And I think we had over 100 sets. In fact, I'm pretty sure. And some of them were gigantic, like that. Everything was built from scratch. So we never went into a theater or on a stage. It was all built. So all my lighting rigs for all the concerts were built. And I think that that's the reason that I'm on early is because I have to plot those things and work them out. But also, I think in my head now, I've worked with multi-camera a lot. And sometimes it is very challenging for lighting, as you say, but I feel like I've kind of got to a point where most of the time I know whether it's going to work and I can preempt it. And sort of that's what I was saying is, make sure that we plan it in the right way. And there was a few curveballs I got thrown on this movie. One of them is there was 2 sets of Graceland that were the upstairs, a bedroom, and then the downstairs was on a separate set, interior on stage, and then we had an exterior set as well. And one day that Austin said to Baz, we were doing the scene where Priscilla's leaving him, and they go from the bedroom, they're having an argument, all the way down the stairs to the front door. She leaves out the front door, and Austin said, "Oh, can we when we do our multicam, can we overlap our dialogue?" And then Baz kind of looked at me and said, "Can we overlap the sets?"
Right, because it's a really emotional moment, right?
Yes,
This is
exactly.
the
Yeah.
relationship is imploding at that point.
Yeah, so what we did was we started shooting in the bedroom. We all ran over to the next set. All the lighting came down on one set, came up on the other, and we kept rolling and we continuously shot it. So the actors would be walking, still talking, and between the sets, between the two of them, they were kind of ad-libbing in between. And then when they got to the next set, they started the dialogue again. And we rolled the whole time. And we had 3 cameras. One was hidden in a cupboard, that had to jump up and run to the next. So I actually, I like getting thrown challenges like that because I didn't want to compromise the look of the movie, and it wasn't a documentary. So I had the night before to figure it out. And then another time we did a similar thing when at the end of the film when Priscilla gets in the car with Elvis and they have that discussion after he's been looking after Lynn Marie on the tarmac at the airport. And Baz said to me, "I'd really like them to overlap again. It's a very emotional scene for them. Can we run 3 cameras at once?" And we had this old Pullman car, a real one. And, normally on a film shoot, you'd get a car that you can take apart. So you can because we had 65mm cameras and we were shooting anamorphic at that point. So everything's big. And he said, "Can we shoot the front angle and the 2 side angles at once?" So there's 3 directions. And can you make it work for lighting? And I just remember going, "Yep, okay." And I just stayed back a couple of hours and plotted it and worked it through with the camera operators and my gaffer so that it still could look beautiful because it was meant to be a very beautiful, emotive scene. But the other cameras weren't in each other's shot and the lighting wasn't in shot. And so I made it work. And I'm really happy with things like that. So I like getting thrown those kind of challenges along the way.
That's kind of amazing because, of course, obviously, that's also a vintage car. So you didn't have the option of taking the roof off so that you could light through it. So you had one camera in the front doing the 2-shot, and then were you shooting through the side windows on the other 2?
Yeah, yes. Over shoulder of, Elvis to Priscilla and Priscilla to Elvis. And then the other one was in the front seat, kind of jammed up against the windshield at the back.
Well, what I love about what you're saying is, obviously it's Baz Luhrmann. We expect a certain style and pace of camera movement, editing, just the way the story will unfold. And I think it would be really easy to kind of get very dogmatic about, these are the shots that we have to get. We're going to make this work. We're not going to match the storyboards or the previs. But I love the fact that, it's all in service of the story, and you still have to have the freedom to completely pivot and make a new game plan on the day.
That's right. I mean, I think that comes from planning. Like, being really well planned left us room to explore as well. And we did the train spotting shots, which were what Baz called reproducing the existing footage, which I had to do exactly with cameras, zooms, lighting, camera moves and positions, and I plotted that. And then afterwards we would do what was called riffing, which means that we were servicing more the drama of the film, connecting the characters or doing moves that were more like being in the audience and being part of the audience, or just leaving ourselves open to explore as well. And that's what I think really good planning does again.
I'm glad you brought that up, because of course I wanted to bring up these, you call them the train spotting sequences. And, I love the fact that the TikTokers have gotten a hold of your movie and are doing these side-by-side comparisons of the original Elvis performance footage with your cinematography.
Yes.
And, I think they do that in the spirit of like, look, isn't Austin Butler's performance amazing? He's doing all, but I look at him and think, oh my God, Mandy, you had to like recreate this exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess, my first question to you is, why did you and Baz feel it was necessary to replicate that in such precise fashion, given that, you're not doing a mock documentary, you're not intercutting archival footage with newly recreated, but you really wanted to nail that look?
It was because I think I always had in my head that this film was being made for all generations. So there's the people that remember Elvis and that may have been at an Elvis concert and that know those concert sequences really well, and you can go online and watch them over and over again, and some people are like that. Then there's people that kind of remember it, and then there's a new audience. So there was sort of those three. I think I always had it in my head that I was, whether I did something, the train spotting footage, I also had to do something that was cinematic. So I rode a really fine line of replicating the lighting. For instance, in the 68 special at NBC, that lighting's pretty harsh TV lighting from the 60s. So I had it replicated, but I also made it a little bit nicer. So there was sort of, I just would compare. I spent all time in my pre-lights just comparing to make sure that I was doing service to train spotting, but also to making a beautiful image of Austin. So it was there, that kind of thing. I think, and Baz does it with the music as well, because you have the music that everybody remembers, but then you have the duets that are being done and the modern style of replicating those songs. So that I felt like my footage was doing the same thing.
Well, we're on the Dolby podcast, so we do tend to have a lot of listeners who can get off in the weeds with us technically, and we also have a lot of students of film and the arts. And so I would love for you to just you mentioned the '68 comeback concert and recreating that. I would love for you just to kind of, let's pop the hood on that and maybe take us on a little bit of a journey around how you did replicate that. I understand that you used vintage camera bodies and put new, sensors in. So just tell us about kind of, what the approach was. And as you said, I'm intrigued by this idea that, this was obviously a concert that was created for an electronic cameras in the 60s. And so recreating that look, it's almost like recreating a kind of a degraded, harsh look.
That's exactly right. Exactly. Well, that's why I ended up shooting on Alexa 65, because in my testing part of the prep, I worked out that gave me the best canvas for everything we're doing, because we ended up being anamorphic in the 70s and we started 50s in a kind of more flatter reference, was more still photography in terms of composition, not cinema. And I could get all these different looks with that camera. And the testing that we did with live grain for some of the archival footage and some of the filters and the effects that VFX were going to put on top of it. So I started with a really good base, I think, and I could change formats within the 65 mil camera and not lose too much definition in the image. But yeah, I did put our 65 camera in a TV camera, and we took it apart. If you go on my Instagram, you can see pictures of it sitting in there. It just fit. And I made one of our monitors, put it at the back, and we turned it black and white, and we shot into that. But it was so I could get the cameras in exactly the right position and they could be in shot. So they were doing double duty. And then I got some old zooms adapted for our cameras for that sequence, because there was a lot of zooms in shot, and we weren't doing a lot of zooms in the film in terms of the drama. But when we were doing that, the replication of the train spotting images, we did. So I had some zooms adapted. So all the cameras they were Panavision, 3:1 and 11:1 and 4:1 zooms, and they would give me the range. And then so the camera operators had moments where they had to do a specific zoom for, from these mills to these mills and timing. So they had to learn all the music and they had to learn the songs. And then I found a lot of with the art department, actually, a lot of period lighting fixtures, and then some of them I gutted and I put LED in them, and some of them I used them for what they were. And then I had everything on a dimmer board too, so that as we moved around, he would be backlit all the time and be able to swing the lighting around when we needed to, when we were changing angles or it was working better from a certain side. So that there was a modern technology inside, complementing the period technology. And as I said, there was a fine line I rode, I feel, for that replication, but also making it a little bit more aesthetically nice on his face.
You mentioned what I find this very intriguing decision to shoot the earlier decades on spherical lenses. And then you said during the 1970s portions, you went to anamorphic. And I guess does that sort of follow the transition to Vegas at that point? So tell me about that decision, just from an artistic and creative standpoint. I'm intrigued by this and kind of what it gave you from an artistic and storytelling standpoint.
Well, when I was looking at the references for the different periods, I looked at stills photography, I looked at existing footage, I looked at some of the archival footage, some of the home movies from Elvis' family as well. But for instance, for the 50s, what really was striking to me was photography of people like Gordon Parks and Sol Leiter, who photographed during that period in Memphis and around that area. And I thought that was a great reference for me in terms, so the lenses were flatter. And then I built LUTs for each of the sequences. So for the 50s, there was a LUT that was very specific in color, had a lot of the yellowy warmth taken out of it. And then working with the art department and the costume department very, very meticulously in getting those images in camera to work together to be in harmony. So nothing was jumping out. So we had a very restricted color palette. And I had quite a strong LUT on, actually, that we built. And then when we went to the 60s, that was the Hollywood period of Elvis. So there was more contrast in the lighting. There was harder light. The blacks were richer in the image. And then when we got to Vegas, there were flares. It was sort of introducing those pastel color elements of the 70s. And then I changed the lenses a lot, those lenses. I had them kind of remade into what they would have been originally, where with all the aberrations and the took out the blue line flare and put more color into the flare and had them a little bit sort of more blooming for some of the images. And so it was, for me, it was things like that I feel people connect with because they've seen cinema of the time. And so how to replicate that to an audience, and also just to create a feeling of a time for people that remember that time as well, and the art of the time.
I really love that response, because when you said that, I immediately knew exactly what you're talking about. Like, we know what 1970s anamorphic widescreen, the flares and the flattened lights and like the things that happen in the out of focus port. We know what that says, and that's the look that you were recreating, because we as an audience know what that is.
Exactly. And sometimes, you don't particularly consciously see it, but you feel it. And I think that those little subtle things are something I work on all the time. Is that I don't want to be, because I couldn't have the film jump around. It wouldn't work if it jumped from one period to another. So the integration of each of the periods and what I did technically, I wanted it to flow from one to another, so that, and then you really see it when you jump back and forward. At the end of the movie, we jump back to the 50s and the 60s, and then it's more obvious the transitions, I think, but in a good way.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk. We've been talking about lenses. I'd love to hear you talk about those lenses that you use. The sort of the framing device at the beginning of the end of the film, Colonel Tom Parker, and the sort of post-stroke kind of hallucinogenic. Was all that? I mean, it's a very stylized look. Was that in camera? And was that sort of? Did you accomplish that through lenses? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had a couple of Petzval lenses, which are lenses that they're based on projector lenses from the late 1800s. And so, and I mean, we're talking things that Dan Sasaki at Panavision does, which, I mean, he's like a magician, and he doesn't tell me how he does things. Like, if he says, I can throw him ideas and say, oh, I like these lenses, but they have the blue flare. And he says, oh, I can take that out. I can put colors back in that. And I go, oh, okay, great. Or I can make the lenses more contrasty, or I can take the contrast out. And then how he changed the shape of the bouquet too is because I feel like in digital, when you have an out of focus light in the background and you have the little feeling of the iris, the little the iris, depending on the shape of it, that bugs me. So I threw him the challenge and said, I really want you to take that out. I want it to look like it was shot at that time. So he did, and he changed it so it was a soft oval shape. And he also, on some of the lenses, he put in these little baffles, because in the 70s, a lot of those lenses the zoom lenses had these baffles. So in the bouquet, you see the baffles in the shape as well. You see like a hard line. So little things like that, and I worked with him on those lenses for about 6 months, actually, to get everything right for each of the iterations, because as we say, the 50s was flatter, but I didn't want it super sharp. I didn't want it super technically correct. Like, I find that sometimes newer lenses are too clinical on digital, and so I wanted that feeling back that they were shot on film. And with the kind of integration of we did live grain in different iterations throughout the film. And then, for instance, the very final concert when he's doing Unchained Melody, that I feel we did a lot of work in post on that, but we did tests, and then I'd work out how to match those shots exactly. But they were degraded a lot as well, and so that was I'm really proud of that as well.
You just brought up the grading process and especially on that last sequence, but listening to the way you talk about the development and your work with Panavision and designing the lenses and the LUTs and it reminds me of it makes me think about a conversation I had years ago with the late Harris Savitas, who was just a fantastic cinematographer. And he was telling me, like, he said back then, he was like, I see a future where we're just going to light everything flat, just put the lights up. We're going to treat it like a commercial. Then we'll go into post-production and we'll do all of our image manipulation at that point. And what you're describing is so far in the opposite. So tell me about, like, why getting it in camera is so important to your look and aesthetic. And then is there anything for the DI to do at that point? Like, what's your relationship with the color correction, the DI process?
That is a good question, because on this movie, I did all my LUTs on set and in testing. And when we do camera tests on a Baz Luhrmann film, there's never, someone standing in front of a grey card. There's partial set built, there's costumes, there's hair ideas, there's all these different elements that are going to be in that image in the end, as much as we can along the way. So then I could set the LUTs very meticulously. And on this film, I see, it's funny Harris said that, because I remember people talking about that, but it hasn't happened, as you say. And what I did was, once I had the LUTs in, and I would go into our so we made them, with our DIT on set, and then every night I would go into dailies and make sure that all the cameras were matching, because sometimes they don't. If you get a camera in on a daily rental, it's not always matching color or contrast with the others. So I'd make sure that was all correct. So when we got to the DI on this movie, hardly anything changed. It was just a matter of smoothing out, and and I spent a few weeks in it, and then we came back and there was some other stuff done after all the VFX were finished. But the other thing was that Petsfile lens that I used, as you say, I always try and do as much as I can in camera, because then it gives the director an idea and it's in the cutting room. And I feel like it is more of an organic feeling. But there were some sequences where the Petsfile lens had to be reproduced by VFX, because there's one shot, for instance, when the Colonel's walking through the slot machines, in Vegas, and they replicated them. Like we had I think we had 2 rows in camera, and then they were replicated. So in a case like that, I would do a reference take with the Petsfile, and then we would do a clean take with one of our spherical lenses or anamorphic, whether we're in that period. And then that was reproduced by VFX. And sometimes that has to happen because they're putting background in the blue screen, and getting the definition between the foreground and the background is just too difficult, so that we would do that. So, and they did a fantastic job. And the other thing was, I'll just talk about Rustwood for 1 second, because that's an interesting collaboration between myself and VFX too, is that that's the concert where he does trouble and he gets pulled off stage.
This is the big concert, like midway through the film, where he's been told to contain himself, but Elvis will not be contained, right?
No, and he really lets loose. And I was replicating some the work done by a stills photographer called Alfred Wertheimer that followed Elvis through that period of time, and
Stunning
some
black
of his,
and white photography. Yeah.
Exactly. And some of those images we reproduced, but we were going to shoot that outside that concert because it was in a baseball stadium, and I had like Musco lights ready to go on each of the corners, like big 16 heads on them. And then the weather was going to be really bad for that period, and we all said, we can't go out there in after one night's a quagmire of mud and we've got 400 extras. And so I did some tests on stage, and we shot it on one of the big stages, the one where we did the showroom actually, and I made smaller versions of the Musco lights with not Molpars, with Maxi Brutes. And so I made a small version and I put it as far back as I could. And then I did tests with atmosphere and depth of field to make it look like they were 4 times further away. And then the same with the VFX is that they put, because we only had 400 audience, they extended the audience and the stadium in the background. But part of my job these days, and it's something I really actually enjoy, is working with VFX very early on and discussing these things with the director and making sure that the two of us are on the same page all the way through production. So what's going to be on that blue screen out of the window, and how are we going to extend the audience, and what do you guys need for this from me? And if I use a Petsfile in this situation, that's fine, but in this it's not. So that dialogue continues through the whole film, and it's a bigger part of my job on every movie. And as you say, it's I'm more and more involved in that area. Like I just did the next film, I did some virtual camera shooting in a volume, and that, like, now I feel like DPs are in the conversation from the start rather than it being taken away from them, which everybody was afraid of. I feel like I'm more involved, which is actually really great.
One of the questions I had for you is, everybody talks about the recreation of the concerts, but one of the fun things that stuck out for me was you're also recreating some of these 1960s Hollywood movies. And I'm really curious about, did you learn anything about the way those movies were shot in having to reconstruct those sequences? Yeah,
I did. The bad lighting and the a lot of depth of field, and then there's one sequence in the movie where they did a deep fake face replacement on Elvis, between Elvis and Austin, where he's walking through a party. I can't remember the name of the film now, but that's the only time we did that. And other than that, we replicated everything from scratch with the art department, everything. So yeah, it was sort of, again, like I said, it was like, how do I reproduce this lighting that I would think would be bad these days, but making it look more complementary. And a lot of it I did with having older lenses, I think, was a start. And like our Sphero 65s, which were our spherical lenses, again, I took them back to how they would have looked at the time.
That's amazing. We talked a little bit about the DI process, but obviously I can't let you go without asking your thoughts about Dolby Vision and sort of how do you feel about Dolby Vision and high dynamic range, and how is that useful to you as a tool?
I think is I think it's useful because what it gives is something that you can't have with just a straight DI DCP. But what I always do is make sure I maintain the same look of the movie, because I think I've had it happen to me occasionally where it's kind of gone off and been stretched too far. And I think that as long as you're maintaining that, keeping the highlights where they should be and the shadows where they should be, but taking advantage of what it gives you in between and the color range and things like that is what works.
Well, final question. I know that you were only the third woman in history to get nominated for the Cinematography award. And I was a little surprised thinking back on it. I didn't realize that all three of you have basically been within the last several years, Ari and then Rachel previously for Mudbound. So, as someone, you knew from a very early age, you've been doing this for a while, and you knew from an early age that cinematography was your thing. What do you hope that this says to, young women who might be interested in becoming cinematographers?
Well, I think it's definitely getting better. I mean, when I first started, there was hardly anyone, and I was the only woman in the camera department on set for years on many films that I shot. And I've always tried to train young girls and bring people into the camera electric and gripping. But I think that, there's still only 6% of films last year were shot by women. So by you bringing this up and us talking about it makes people aware that it is an option for women to get into camera department and do my job. And if you're passionate about something, I urge you to keep pushing. And it is getting better. It's definitely getting better. Like you say, these last three nominations have been in the last few years. So there's a change coming, but we need to, if there's not people, like there's not enough great camera operators or women, let's train them. So that's my point of view on it.
Well, Mandy, thank you so much for making the time and coming, just the day after you got back from the BAFTAs. We really appreciate you. It's been a fun conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Glenn. My pleasure.
Many thanks to Mandy and the entire team behind Elvis. Next up, in alphabetical order, is the legendary Roger Deakins, nominated for his work on Empire of Light. Roger has won the Oscar for Best Cinematography twice in the past, and this is his 16th nomination.
Here's to the future.
Walking those old scenes.
Here's to getting back up. And here's to coming home.
Roger, first of all, I just want to thank you for coming on the Dolby podcast to talk to us about Empire of Light. I just want to fanboy out for a second. I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, and not only an admirer of your work, but also an admirer of your podcast. The Team Deakins podcast that you do with your wife, James, I think is just really, the conversations you've had are fantastic, very informative. And I love that you've given some love to some of our sound community on your podcast with interviews with Skip.
A couple of things on that. You should really thank James, my wife, for the podcast. I'm a bit of a shy person, so if I'd been by myself, it would have never have happened. But we started it actually before the pandemic as an extension of our sort of website, and we thought we would just be talking to people in the immediate crew and people that we work with, and it's just expanded like it's crazy, and people seem to like it. So, and we enjoy it. So yeah, that's been good.
Roger, the only problem with it is that you have to stop it when you actually go shoot a movie, and we miss hearing your episodes and your updates.
Yeah, well, there probably won't be so many movies, so you'll maybe get more podcasts.
Great. Well, we're here to talk about Empire of Light, and congratulations, obviously, on your Academy Award nomination. First question: does the nomination process ever get old for you? It's been, there've been so many for you at this point.
I got to say, it was a real surprise, a very pleasant surprise this year. I mean, does it get old? No, I mean, I went many years without being nominated, and then suddenly I was nominated, and then I wasn't. And it's like, it's great. It's a celebration of movies, so it's nice to be part of it. Really
fantastic. Well, I'm excited to talk with you about this film because I really. I got the chance to see it at the Telluride Film Festival and loved it, and I've watched it now another couple of times. And I think the photography is just such a striking part of the film. I wanted to talk with you first about the location. The Empire Cinema is such an important part of it's a character in the film, and I know that. That the movie obviously is set in a small English coastal town during the winter. And the location that you found was an actual old defunct Art Deco cinema from the 1930s. So when you found that location, what ideas for lighting and composition kind of came to you from the space? And I guess my other question is, what's the biggest issue you had to contend with that location?
Well, I mean, the thing about the location was that, we looked all over the country. I mean, mostly online, looking at cinemas that were on the promenade of the coastal towns. And what I really liked was in Redcar, but it had been knocked down like 2 months before. I found it on the web. And but then the location supervisor came up with this one in Margate, Dreamland. Yeah, which, it wasn't really what Sam had originally imagined, and that was the thing. We'd been scouting Brighton and Worthing and the South Coast, which is where Sam had set the script, really. But there wasn't anything there that made sense. But we did talk about this one in Brighton that he had in mind, which had been turned into a casino, but the front was still there, and it was on the promenade, right on the seafront, looking out. And we talked about, well, what the possibility of, if we use the exterior, what could we do as the interior, the lobby and stuff? And would that be we have to sort of make a sort of jigsaw of these different places to put together one composite cinema. And I don't know if it was I suggested, I think it was, maybe we could build a set in a parking lot which was available in Brighton. So you'd basically have the same view out of the lobby as you would expect to see out of the location, which would be just the exterior. Well, anyway, that didn't work. But when the location manager found the Dreamland in Margate, and Sam came around to the idea, it seemed too much of an opportunity to turn down, even though it wasn't visually what Sam had in mind. And the town, Margate, it's not quite the South Coast. It's more like an East Coast town. I mean, it faces north on the Thames. So it's slightly different. It's a little bit more dilapidated and a bit more lived in, I suppose you could say. And I personally thought it fitted the characters really well. So anyway, it seemed too good an opportunity. So we had the exterior, and then luckily there was an empty plot of land between the frontal, the houses on the seafront, where we could build a set. So Mark Tilsbury did this design for the lobby, which would then be 3 doors away from the actual exterior. Then when we got into Dreamland and looked around, there was an old ballroom. Again, it wasn't exactly what Sam had in mind, but it was fantastic because it was what it was. It had been an old ballroom in a very sort of Asian style with all this sort of gilt work and mirrors. But it had the 2 sides were completely open. So you look straight out towards the beach and the promenade, the beach and the ocean. There was just this line horizon, and it was just fantastic. When we walked into that space, it was like, wow, this is amazing. How lucky are we? We had solved most of the issues. So we had the lobby as a set. We had the exterior and all the surrounds were really nice. We had the ballroom. We had the passages, the disused passages to the ballroom. The only thing we didn't have was an actual cinema screen, a theatre. And so then we looked at all the possibilities in London and everywhere in the country. But the problem with that sort of thing is then you have to move from your main base, which is obviously going to be for us now Margate. So then Mark suggested we take this old theatre in Dreamland, which had been partitions, been set into 2 different screening rooms and been turned into a bingo hall. Anyway, it looked completely awful. But Mark managed to take the whole thing and renovate it into this really quite elegant screen one. So then basically we had all the elements we needed within striking distance of each other, which obviously on a smaller film was really crucial, just to the practicality of shooting, but also to be able to sort of say, well, okay, the weather's no good, frankly, we can't shoot this scene, so let's go inside. We could move around a little bit.
Well, you brought up some really interesting topics. I love this idea that you built the theater lobby a couple of doors down, because one of the things that struck me about the film is that the town is such a constant presence. We're often looking out at the theater lobby windows directly across at the seawall and the street. So how did you balance the indoor and outdoor lighting to get those kind of complex, through the lobby out to the street outside shots?
Yeah, it's funny. When we first talked about that, we had sort of talked about the idea of doing it as a big set inside and then having a green screen or whatever to extend the background, because then it would be easy to control. But there was something about it. I mean, both Sam and I felt there was something wrong with that. So the idea of doing it on location, but then being given that problem of controlling the balance between the interior and the daylight. But I felt it was worth it. Just, that problem, okay, we'll overcome that problem. It would be worth it just to get the feeling of the exterior. And I didn't mind the exterior for a lot of the time being, fairly blown out, as long as you could see what's out there. I'm not somebody who wants to balance it completely. But in talking with Mark Tilsbury, the designer, and the art department, I mean, basically I wanted to build in enough lighting, enough fixtures on the interior of the lobby that I could balance that with the exterior enough, So I wanted control over it. So it was a bit of a struggle, really, with production to get the equipment to do this, but it's all basically LED strips or Astera bulbs. And we got one big chandelier that the set dresser got down from Glasgow, was big chandelier, and we had to strip it out and put in Astera bulbs, LED bulbs, RGB, so that I could control the level of the light to some degree, but also a little bit of the color. So if the light exterior was getting a bit late in the day and a bit blue, I could just shift the interior a little bit to try and retain that balance. So that was really the practical issues. I mean, I had sort of thought about making up NDs and all the rest to put on the doors and the windows, but then you think the time that would take if you needed to put them on. So that was not possible. That didn't seem practical at all, apart from being very expensive. So yeah, the idea was to build in enough LED RGB strips and bulbs just to be able to play with the levels a little bit. But also the great thing about doing it that way was when the camera shifted position, I could always adjust those lights a little bit for the shot, so I could have like more backlight on one angle and then shift it to the opposite side when the camera went around, which was really quite a handy trick. In fact, I didn't use that many lights on the floor. I think I had 5 of the small Filex Fresnels. Well, I didn't use them as Fresnels. I used them as open faces with a soft grid on the front, a softbox. And I basically used them for the closer shots, just to pull out a face or something. But mainly it's lit by everything that we built into the set.
That's amazing. One of the things that I've always been struck by about your cinematography, and especially on Empire of Light, is that your films tend to not feel lit to me.
I always remember James Wong Howe. I read an interview with him once, very late in his career. He said when he started lighting a set, he might, a big stage set, he might use 60 lamps. And towards the end of his career, he said, now I'm down to about 10. I want a little bit longer so I can get down to one light, and that's always struck with me. And I feel like that, really. You're always trying to strip it down, make it more and more simple, really.
Yeah.
From an aesthetic point of view, but also from a practical point of view of actually being able to work quickly, and efficiently.
And what a gift that, that location had those derelict spaces upstairs.
That was fantastic, because also there were all these deco elements that were left, that just enough that you felt this must have been a palace. Well, it hadn't been a palace, but it was, that was a real bonus.
Can you talk about your approach to lighting that upstairs space? Now, that really does feel like we were just getting, the blast from outside through those huge windows.
The way I was lighting it was to say to Sam, well, I don't want to shoot it in full sunlight. I mean, it was as simple as that. Yeah. You couldn't light the interior. Well, I mean, you could if you had a number of cranes, cherry pickers and big soft lights exterior, whatever. You could do it, but I mean, it was ridiculous for us.
Yeah.
So no, I said, can we to a degree schedule this so we can shoot in a sort of softer light, or early in the morning when the sun might be at a certain angle,
Yeah.
And then we had a bonus because we got a couple of shots late in the day with full sun, which was actually perfect for what we wanted. So again, because we had the location, the set, and some other elements within the town we were shooting, and a couple of sets on stage, actually, at an airfield nearby, we could kind of move around depending on the weather, which was kind of crucial, really. So the ballroom, the upstairs the actual ballroom was kind of almost like treat it like an exterior. We've got to shoot it in the right weather. I mean, the approaches and all that were lit because they were not only because they were lower and I could get things at the windows, but because it was better to light that and have that option.
Tell us about the firework New Year's Eve scene. That's one of my favorite moments in the film, and really a moment of sort of the first intimacy between Hillary and Stephen. But, a nighttime fireworks scene that must have been challenging. What was your approach to capturing that?
Well, again, it goes back to the discussion about, okay, how are we going to do this? I mean, because one option that was talked about was do it as a set in a warehouse, just have the roof, and then go the CG route and just do everything in the background as a CG element. And I was just so against that. It didn't make sense to me. And the great thing about the roof of this, the real roof of the Dreamland location, was there was this incredible block of apartment building right next to it. And when Sam and I were scouting the roof, we said, well, what if Stephen lived in that apartment in that block opposite? It just, again, it seemed too good to turn down, really. It certainly wasn't the way Sam had scripted it. And so we adjusted the dialogue. So when they come on the roof, Stephen looks up and says, oh, my mother could be looking at us now. Just a little moment to make you feel that's where he lived and it was part of his community. Anyway, so we decided to do it for real. on the real roof. And again, question was the fireworks. And I said, well, that's going to be light in the shot. I mean, I want real fireworks. So we did some tests with fireworks and asked for bigger ones and brighter ones, as you do. And it just evolved from there. Then I talked to Mark about, we were already going to change all the signage on the front of the building because it said Dreamland, but we wanted Empire. So all the neon had to be redone. So I asked Mark to do a little doorway neon on the roof so that I could just delineate where Hillary and Stephen come out onto the roof. And then the problem was, really, I didn't want to light the roof from outside. I lit the town. I wanted to see the town or elements of the town. But I didn't want to light the roof as though there was light elsewhere. And I didn't want to put floodlights on the roof or something. So what's going to light them when they have this conversation? So I thought, well, can we get some sort of skylight? Because there were a couple of skylights on the roof complex, but not where I wanted one. So Mark designed one, and it made sense because it felt like it was a skylight above the lobby. And so we did a fake skylight, and then I created a little ring of little LED spot bulbs that I put in the top of it to bounce off the floor of the skylight as though light was coming up. It had to be soft. So when you've only got like 18 inches, the trick I used to use is a lot of little lights to bring up a level but make it very soft. So, so everything sort of evolved, really.
That's amazing. Yeah, and the light
when they're leaning on the wall, on the parapet, looking at the fireworks, I wanted this very warm yellow light, as if they were being lit by the neon, but I didn't want one character backlit and the other character frontlit. So we just put up some towers down below, and I used these LED multicolor strips to produce a sort of soft yellow light, just washing up from below as though it was coming off the neon, but it was actually my light that was lighting them. It gave them a little bit more shape. So it was fairly simple. The hard one was the weather, because we had to cancel shooting on the roof one time because of the weather, the wind. But then we got a really good forecast for a couple of days, and we had to give the town, notice of when we were going to shoot it, because they had to shut down the promenade and all this. And we had to put the fireworks on the beach, and the tide had to be right so they could get the fireworks when they needed them, and all this. So there was quite a few variables, but we had a really good night. And the trick was that Richard Cheel, our effects supervisor, could get a little bit of atmosphere down on the promenade coming up, so that the lights I had just shooting up from below, there was just enough atmosphere to silhouette the two characters, Stephen and Hillary, against the background before the fireworks went off, or when the fireworks were too high, they weren't actually silhouetting them. I had this little very, very light haze that gave me enough level to have them silhouetted. So, little things build up.
I wanted to ask you, Norman, who is one of my favorite characters in the film, he's the projectionist. Once he takes a shine to Stephen and invites him up into the booth, he has a wonderful speech where he talks about the light from the projector and 24 frames a second, and the flaw in the optic nerves that allows you to not see the black between the frames. For you as a cinematographer, on this movie that's so much about film, I was curious about the decision to capture digitally. Was there ever any conversation about wanting to shoot this on film?
No, we'd shot a film about 1917 on a digital camera. So, I find it, you're creating an image. I go to the cinema, or I sit and watch a film on a 60-inch TV, and often I can't tell there was something the other night, and then I was reading about it on IMDb, and it said they shot on film. And I went, oh my God, I didn't realize. I don't know half the time. I mean, you think the audience knows? I don't think so. I'm I'm not really interested in that. That conversation really. You're producing an image and telling a story, and it's about frame and light, and I don't. Yeah, I mean, there's some things I prefer about film. I mean, I won't deny it, but there's also a lot I prefer about digital. So
yeah,
I think it's a non-conversation, really.
I will not ask a follow-up question about it.
Go on. It's fine. But
no. It's great. I'm just always I'm curious about if those conversations happen, because I feel like a lot of directors are nostalgic about film.
I am too. I'm nostalgic about it, but time moves on. When I was a kid in Torquay, there was 6 cinemas I could walk to. There's 1 now.
Yeah.
So I'm nostalgic about that. The world changes. You can't stop it,
That's great.
You just have to flow with it.
Tell me about your choice of lenses. I know that the film is in the 2:3:9 aspect ratio, but you made the decision not to use anamorphic lenses, and you shot with sphericals.
I've never shot anamorphic, actually.
Is that true?
I've shot a lot of tests over the years. I keep kind of thinking, maybe anamorphic. There was one film that Joel and Ethan were going to make that I suggested we should shoot anamorphic for a very particular reason. But the film never happened, so I haven't actually shot anamorphic. I like spherical. I think it's more true to my eye,
I think a lot of people chase the artifacts from the anamorphic lenses.
Yeah, see, I don't like artifacts. I don't like flare. I don't like distortion. I'm very staid and old-fashioned. I like things to be very clean and clear. I'm very simple. I'm a very simple person. I like spherical.
Well, you're also not afraid of embracing new technology. I may not have this right, but my impression is that you made one of the first feature film DIs on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
I think it was the first Hollywood film that it was done totally with a DI. Yeah. They'd done part of Pleasantville with the same DI process, but and that was just going black and white, I believe. And but Oh Brother, Art Thou, we did the whole thing. Yeah. Oh my God, that was an experience.
I've read that was a pretty bumpy road, but how for you typically, how involved are you with the DI?
I'm there every moment, every shot. No, every film I've ever done, I've either been in the lab timing it, or I've been sitting in the DI suite doing every shot. I mean, it's so much part of the process. I don't want to shoot a film and then just let it go and have somebody else color it, especially with a DI now. I mean, you could do anything with it. I mean, I like to shoot the image as close on set as I want it. So I don't really do that much in the DI. Yeah, sometimes I can do a window to knock down a wall or something, or even change a color of a wall if there's not money for the art department to paint it, stuff like that. But I don't really do a huge amount. I really want to get that on set, And I guess that's also partly why I love, even on a film like Blade Runner 2049, Denny and I decided to build as much as possible, as much of it is in camera as we could possibly do. I really like things to be done in camera, and I like to, light it and create the colors and the feel of it on set, not on some computer later on. I think that's mad. And the only film that we really stretched in the DI was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Because it was the only way to do it. And Bev Wood, who used to work at Deluxe, at eFilm and Deluxe, I mean, we spent weeks and weeks trying to find a chemical way of getting to that kind of look, to take away the greens of the trees and give it this sort of almost like a painted postcard sort of thing. And in the end, talking with Joel and Ethan, we just said, look, it seems there is this electronic process coming up. The DI process is evolving. If we shoot now, do we think in a year's time it will have progressed enough to be able to do what we need to do? And we did a few tests, and it was, to do a few tests was really, it was a bit of a pain, but you could see the possibility. And we just took it. Joel and Ethan said, look, we have a year from shooting to release. We have a year, so let's take the risk. And sure enough, it just about worked out.
What's your experience and your feelings about Dolby Vision and extended dynamic range and the color palette?
Well, I think it's great now. I mean, the first at first it was really hard to control, I must say. I don't know, I'm not very technical, whether it's a software thing or what, but you really couldn't control the highlights, and it frightened me. But now I think it's I would say it's the best release of certainly of Empire or of 1917. Yeah.
You still operate a lot, don't you?
I've always operated. Yeah. It might have got me in trouble a couple of times, but I mean, and a couple of times I haven't been able to do a job because I've said to the director, "Do you know I operate?" And they've said, "Oh, but you wouldn't on this." And I said, "Yes, I would if I did it." And I haven't been able to do the job because I just will not shoot a film unless I'm operating. No, I mean, it's just the way I work. I mean, I tried once and it failed and I left the movie. So I'm not going to go there again.
Well, it's interesting in the sense of like, I imagine it actually puts you even in some ways, a more intimate relationship with the actors, even necessarily sometimes with the director who is probably off working at a video village. Right. And I was just, you talked about James Wong Howe and wanting to get down to shooting with one light. But there is a really key sequence in Empire of Light that feels like it's shot with one light, which is, Hillary's very emotional breakdown sequence in her apartment, which appears that you shot it with a single like naked light bulb. And I did. It was very simple.
Amazing. It really was that. Yeah. I mean, it was very simple. I mean, when Sam and I, we spent a while talking about through the whole script and like what we could do visually and this, that, and the other. And one thing was that scene. It's like, how far do we go? Okay, it's meant to be quite dark, and she's sort of messed up the flat. It's all kind of weird. And we talked about that. How far can we go? And I said, well, what if it was just a bare bulb? I forget whether it was Sam or I said it, but one way or the other, we got to this very simple way of lighting it with a bare bulb. Then Stephen turns the lights off later in the scene, and it's the police light on the curtains, and it's just this sort of minimal stuff, and a few lights left on in the kitchen that have a slightly different color, and then the social services bust in the door, and the light swings above the door, and then it's all very warm and kind of, so you kind of play with the different things. But yeah, the bare bulb seemed like, what's the simplest, but not over the top? What's the simplest thing we could do to make it slightly different and slightly, not noir, but, slightly haunting, I suppose. And that was the simplest, most believable thing,
It is very haunting. And I was curious about your experience with shooting that particular scene, because obviously, Olivia Colman is a very heightened emotional state. But it would, with one light, were you wide open? Was she in kind of a narrow depth of field situation, or was she able to move? And how did you balance
she could go anywhere she wanted. I mean, we did rehearse it. She didn't rehearse it in speed, but we rehearsed it so we basically knew where she was going to go, basically. But I was shooting. Yeah, I was probably shooting at 2 or something. It wasn't completely wide open on the signatures, but it was pretty wide. But Andy Harris, my first assistant, I've been working with since Fargo, so that's a few years. He can focus. Yeah, I don't have to worry about that. That was not a worry at all. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take on the whole movie. I think he missed one take And I say missed, there was a little buzz on one shot. But I mean, he is an amazing focus puller. But I think now I think he's operating, so which is a shame. But there we are for me.
You're gonna have to find a new focus puller.
Yeah, I might. Yeah, it must be really bad.
Tell me about the one of the final scenes, which is Hillary in the theater watching Being There, which of course is it's a fantastic choice. I got the experience to watch a print of Being There projected a couple of years ago, and the cinematography is by Caleb Deschanel, and it's just extraordinary. Tell us about
it's one of my favorites cinematography wise. It's really brilliant. I felt really bad because the quality of image that we were showing was not really up to what Caleb had done, I'm afraid. But yeah.
Was that a comp, or did you do that all practically?
Oh no, it's all practical. Yeah, no, it's all practical. But we only had a fairly low res digital projector. You know, we had to have the ARC projectors for the real, projection booth with Toby and Stephen. But that was a little set, and we did a sort of cheat. We got a lens. We got a lens on the ARC projectors just so that we could fake the distance of a screen from the front of the set. It's only like 25, 30 feet away from the front of the set, but it looks much further because it just kind of the lens and everything. And I wanted really to have the image there because it reflects on the glass and everything else. So you get all these wonderful things going on. But when we actually filmed the other part of the scene in the theater itself with Hillary sitting watching the scene, all we had was the exterior of the projection booth, as it were, in the set. But there was a kind of not exactly a very high output digital projector with what is basically a Blu-ray projecting Being There, which was kind of embarrassing, really. I wish it had been better. But it was just enough. The projector was just bright enough that I could shoot with it. I mean, it really was wide open. It was wide open at 1600 too, so it really wasn't a huge amount of light because it's very big. It was a big theater, actually. It was quite big, and the size of the screen was pretty big, especially given today's cinemas. It was very big, and when you're looking at it, it's all in camera, obviously. But when the screen's not in view, then I had a fake screen that I could bring in as tight as I could get it to whatever the shot was, so I could get a little bit more light on Olivia's face. But I wanted that. So we were playing the film. I'd chosen clips from the actual film that would give me the kind of movement of the light. And then obviously there were certain sections we wanted to see the image on screen. So it was all done without any additional light. It was purely the projector and Being There.
Well, that's perfect. It's an amazing sequence. Roger, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about Empire of Light.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
Loved watching this film. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to?
It's quite a lot, but you'll find. I could tell you about shooting on that beach at Beachy Head Camber Sands in about 50 mile an hour wind. But anyway, no. There were a lot of things.
I can imagine from the comments you've dropped. I can imagine that the weather was an element to be dealt with on this film.
Yeah. But it was the weather and the tides, because when there was one exterior where they're at a tide pool. It's old Victorian tidal pool where people swim in. It's still used. And there's Stephen skimming stones, right? And I think we shot it on the third attempt because it not only have to have the weather right, but we had to have low tide at a certain time so we could get our shoot, within this block of time. So there was a lot of things we had to work out. But yeah, I've been very lucky with weather over the years. 1917 showed that more than anything. Yes. But we were lucky on Empire as well, really.
Well, Roger, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your time today and talking to us about Empire of Light. It's a fantastic film.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Many thanks to Roger and the entire team behind Empire of Light. And last, but certainly not least, is Florian Hoffmeister, nominated for his work on Tar. This is Florian's first Academy Award nomination.
You must in fact stand in front of the public and God and obliterate yourself.
Congratulations to you on your first Academy Award nomination.
It's still a bit surreal, I have to be honest, man. I mean,
of course, yeah. I wanted to ask you, like, how's that process going for you? What's it like, kind of going through this circus for the first time?
Yeah, on an anecdotal level. So it was Mondays when they were published. So I'm currently in Iceland, and obviously on a different time zone. And I always thought they would be, publicized at night. So I was going for a night shoot, and I was thinking, okay, tonight, whatever, 3:00 my time, I'll check my mobile phone, and if I've received no text messages, well, then that was that, So I've just woken up, and suddenly the phone rings, and this guy from Germany calls me, who I didn't, expect at all, and he just yells down the phone, "It has happened! It has happened!" And I'm seriously, I can't really, I think, what is he talking about? Has he lost his mind? So he says, "Well, you've been nominated," and literally within seconds, my phone, which just blew away. It's like text messages, and so it is quite something. It was. Quite overwhelming.
We're thrilled to have you on the Dolby podcast to talk about Tar. I've watched the film now 3 times, and it's just a stunning achievement. And congratulations to you. There's so much that I want to talk with you about, but one of the things that we love to talk about on this movie is how filmmakers start the film, how they open it, and what they need to accomplish, like in that first 10 minutes of the film, as they're kind of getting the audience used to the cinematic language that they're going to use to take the audience on this journey. And you're doing some really interesting stuff in that first 10 minutes of the film. There's a number of things that I want to touch on, but obviously, the biggest part of that first 10 minutes is the interview with the New Yorker in front of the live audience. And I feel like, it seems like your camera work is really designed almost to reflect Lydia Tarr's personality. It's precise, it's focused, it's unforgiving. Like we see locked off shots, very formal composition. Can you talk about kind of your development of the look of how you wanted to shoot those initial sequences and what that tells the audience about her character?
I have summed it up very nicely. I can only nod and be in awe. Because that was that was the intent. The first thing I really have to credit, obviously, this is it is already present on the page in Todd's script. It was very clear that this would be the opening sequence. It was word for word had been written, and it was apparent when you read it. The first 10 minutes, you go, "Oh, that's going to be these 2 people on stage." So we shot this quite, I would say, in the middle of the process. So we had, by that time, of course, a well-established language, but it was always clear that we would not move the camera unless a character would move. Obviously, that was like one of the big rules that we started very, very early on. We actually had to start with all the conducting sequences in the concert hall. That was like scheduled first. So obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about those. And the other thing I want to say before I answer the question fully is it was a very organic process developing this language. It's like, albeit, one can talk endlessly about the result and do that with academic scrutiny and diligence. There was also, when we did it, and the intent was very clear, but it's also a very creative and organic process. So one of the very first things that, because we had to hit the ground running, was that when we talked about all the orchestra stuff, that Todd was adamant that it should feel like work, So at cinematographer's heart, of course, starts blooming when you hear Mahler's Fifth Symphony, the first bar, you think, oh, the camera, you almost are inclined to move. It was very clear this should not be about beautifying, should not romanticize it. It had to be really, giving diligence to the work and the craftsmanship and also the exhaustion that it takes to be a musician. So those things were very clear to me very early on, that we would not move. So hence, when you come back to Alice Tully, it was clear we would be very composed and we would play this as real as we could. This should really feel like, you could have, if you hadn't known that you'd gone into a movie theater, come into the first 3 minutes, you actually might have find yourself, am I actually in Alice Tully Hall? And I thought that the choice of getting Adam Gopnik for real and the way that he performed, even while shooting, I was thinking, is this a documentary? So it was very, very clear that we would do this. And then the second step was, of course, clear that when she then meets her benefactor, Elliot Kaplan, that the scene would have a similar dynamic. So in my world, the film starts with Lydia Tarr being in front of an audience of 1,000, so to say. In the second scene, when she is with Elliot Kaplan, it's an audience of 1, but she is still that persona that she creates in public. So it was clear that we would have a similar approach as we did in the Alice Tully Hall, that we would just observe her. The camera would be very still, very focused, very composed, but also the lighting on her would be very upbeat, would be very, to actually show her in the brightest colors and the brightest light that she would like to see herself in, And then I think, and that was probably one of the great things about the scene that then follows, the third scene, and that probably closes. I've gone a bit further into the first 10 minutes. It's like the first 20 minutes. Then, we came into that, then ends with that entire first act ends with the scene at Juilliard's, where then we meet her in a more personal space, because she then starts talking about, she's teaching music, which is of course her passion.
And we see her in that sequence more animated and passionate than we have seen her, and more, in a sense, authentic. So, and obviously, like, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I really want to talk with you about that sequence at Juilliard. It's compositionally, it's completely different than everything we've seen before up to that point. So I was at a Q&A with Cate Blanchett, in which she said, and I may not have this exactly right, but she seemed to imply that the decision to shoot that Juilliard sequence in one take, because it plays as one continuous, like 10.5-minute take. She seemed to imply that decision to do it that way came pretty close to the actual time to shoot the sequence. So can you talk about, what was your reaction when Todd Field said, this is a 10.5-minute scene, let's do it in one continuous take?
Yeah, I remember that very well, because we had started prep. I was probably, it was like 9 weeks before, and it was all location based. So we, racing around Berlin, trying to find all these places. So, and I remember the location for Juilliard was one of the very first we visited. And we are sitting there and we are talking about it. And he says, I think we should do this in one. And I completely jumped at that, because by that, in my world, by that time we would have spent roughly 20 minutes, probably a little less, maybe 18, with people that had been seated either on a stage or around a table. So to unleash the camera at that point, when we meet her in a completely different, in a more personal environment, I thought that was perfect. Genius for me. So, and we got back in the car and we talked about it. And also we talked about that, I think it was not just about being a one shot. It was also a more philosophical thing, because one shots can be quite muscular filmmaking in one way, you show and so obviously, first of all, we wanted to construct it that the audience didn't feel, couldn't settle back and go, oh, let's see, they're showing us a one shot. That was not the intent at all. It was more about giving Cate a form of editorial power So basically, we would talk about the scene, and we would say, well, if we had shot it traditionally, we would have broken it down in, say, 30 setups. Now, we wanted her to lead us through those 30 setups, but having the editorial power of, leading us with her movements through these shots. But still, the idea was still to get the camera in those angles that we wanted the camera to be. So there was all these conversations were ongoing. I remember that Todd actually called her from the recce bus or from the scouting bus and said, well, would you be up for it? Not would you be up for it, but informing her, because obviously on her behalf, that's a tremendous, crazy. Yeah, it's a big thing. And I remember that he came back and said, yes. She said, yes. But she said, what about the knee? Because, her student has this tic, he's moving his knee all the time, which agitates her in one form. So the camera had to tell that story, and we had to get ourselves into position that we could also tell the story. And then we ventured off to other things, and I think we shot it probably in week 2 or 3 when we came back to Berlin. And by that time, I had done a few tests in how to rig the camera. We tried all kinds of things. You get a crane, and everything was impossible because it's a very difficult location. And in the end, we thought we could build this rig that was kind of hand carried. So I did one day where I got the rig together and just to prove the point, showed it to Todd, who then really thought, okay, this can happen. We can pull this off.
But it wasn't a Steadicam. No,
we didn't want to go Steadicam because Steadicam has this.
It has a very characteristic look.
Exactly. So no, we didn't want to go with Steadicam because it has a certain form of, with mature audience or with our, all of us are quite mature now with film language. So I think the Steadicam would have almost implied a form of predictability. It did, and also, you can, and also it was, it's like a person following. We didn't want a person to follow. We wanted a cinema to follow, So we built this rig with a gimbal. It's similar, similar technology has been applied to like 1917, we didn't use the exact same thing, but we did it. And it was actually quite beautiful because you have these grips that would pass on this, this tube with a camera attached to it. So I always thought one of the most moving things of that sequence was when we did one day of technical rehearsals, and then finally we started shooting, and you have Kate Blanchett doing this amazing performance. Not only is she acting like she always does greatly, but also she plays the piano, she speaks German. It was just crazy. And then we have 4 men on socks following her, carrying a camera. So I thought that's always a beautiful thing, about filmmaking. And it was actually, last anecdotal thing, it was actually like in the movies, the first take was absolutely perfect. And on the last 10 seconds, we had a technical glimpse. And it was exactly like that. We were all like, oh no, but also to, credit and Kate and Todd, they're just full. Yeah, they're full game. She's full game. They say, okay, let's go again. And we did another 12 takes until we finally got it.
12 takes on that, on a 10.5-minute sequence. That's amazing. I mean, I feel like I could talk for you for a half an hour just about that. But how did you go about like hiding your lights? And I presume that you guys were all off in a video village somewhere far away, because it's a 360 shot. There's nowhere to hide.
It was fortunately, it is actually a lecture hall of the gallery around the corner from the Pergamon Museum. It was absolutely new modern architecture. So it was just concrete, but they had these translating booths. So we could hide ourselves in those. And then, it was an interesting thing, the lighting. And it's actually also a bit of a metaphor how we sometimes had to work. I just had to work with the existing structures. We couldn't rig anything. It was all forbidden. It was very clear. Todd loved the space, and me too, because of the, the feeling of the room. So we just got a bunch of Chinese lanterns from IKEA and glued them on the existing fixtures, and then so it was LED fixtures with this, and then we used their local boards that all these lights nowadays on a board, so we could dim and do everything. But it was good old IKEA.
So one of the other elements from that opening of the film is the camera phone footage, which is basically sort of you shot first person, kind of following Lydia as she's on a private plane and she's sleeping in that first one. So I was curious about to hear you talk about how you set up those camera phone shots and why they were so deliberately in the first person. And then the interesting effect is we don't know who's shooting this, and sort of why was that mystery important to you?
It was already in the script. I mean, recently I had a conversation with somebody, and it was an editor. He said, "Is this really the opening shot?" And I had kind of, had the script so present anymore. So I opened it and I looked it up, and it's exactly like that. So, I mean, technically, the interesting thing is we shot everything live. Todd really doesn't believe in green screens in any form. So all the footage that normally is, on phones these days, oftentimes is you just photograph a green phone and it's being put in later. Everything had to be pre-produced. Everything was played in live. All the text messages, everything was, and we really mounted the phone. The phone photographed her. And actually that shot is an absolute live depiction of what was happening. And one of the things that I rediscovered a little bit, which is something that I normally you don't go about it so consciously, is a depth of field, because obviously we play a lot with shallow exposure, and 2.5 is like the f-stop I'm living at for the last 20 years. But with Todd, it was just because we knew there would be so much coverage, there would be a single shot. We really explored, the 5.6, 4.5, 5.6.5, and that shot in particular. You need deep stop to actually depict her as a figure, so you actually understand that this phone is actually filming her. And we had a few sequences that we, even in night shoots, we would go for deep stop and deep focus.
I'm glad you brought that up because, so much of this film takes place in long takes. And obviously, as you say, that probably affected your decisions about depth of field and f-stop. But so much of this film doesn't really, I would say, use traditional coverage. And it kind of, the effect on me as a viewer is it really forces me to be in that moment with Lydia, which is just remarkable. But was that something that you and Todd kind of discussed, like this is going to be part of the approach from the very beginning, your first conversations? And did you have any conversations with the editor, Monica Willie, about it, about the fact that she was not going to be getting a lot of coverage coming in?
Working with Todd, he's a true auteur, in the truest sense. He wrote and directed, obviously, but also produced. So there is no entity that would hunt us down because we didn't do it, or something. So, and I really admire him because the first leap, it's him that took that. And also the bravery, the directorial bravery to expose yourself to a film where you have within the first 30 minutes, a 10-minute sequence that you cannot change. And to me, that is just something that really raises the bar for then everybody else involved. Obviously, it raised the bar for me because I really had to deliver and create imagery that would sustain and hold that. And you could never shoot with working on that film. You could never shoot yourself in a scene where you go, oh yeah, and then halfway through you find the shot and you go, oh, that's really it. And it was always clear that whatever we do, has to stay up there as long as we want it to. And if it's the entire scene, that's it, and then we walk away from it. I mean, we didn't, we weren't fools. So, for example, for the Juliet sequence, we had 3 cameras standing by, and we had 2 operators that we would normally have. And I would have operated the 3rd camera if we had felt this is not really sustainable for whatever reason. We would have defaulted into some kind of a, It's I don't know, not plan B, because there wasn't a plan B, but say we were very responsible. It's and I think that's also something I enjoyed about working with Todd, that there's the bravery, but there's also a sense of responsibility about what it is. And I think one of the things I really enjoy, and what I enjoy most about the success of the film is I grew up with the cinema of the 70s and the 80s. I loved like Antonioni and that stuff, films where you come out and you scratch your head. I always found it extremely invigorating if you have a film that allows you to have a question, and you feel, as an audience, you feel confident that you are allowed to ask. You're not going, maybe I'm a bit dumb. No, that's the fun of it, and that is what I find invigorating. And I thought that Tar, in a way, tapped into this love of mine completely. So I was really over the moon that I could work on this. But it's a real satisfaction to see that it works for people. The way that what I would relate to in terms of the responsibility, and that Todd also, carries is, we don't want to, we really think that audiences are mature. And people can and want to be entertained like that as well. You don't have to think that somebody in the theater seat is dumb. Why should we?
This is a film that requires the audience to keep up. And it's really delightful in that way. But to your point, I feel like the stylistic decisions are so appropriate. For the subject matter. I love what you were saying about. The Juilliard sequence was not a steady cam, because that signals something very specific in terms of a cinematic language. And when I think about long tracking shots in film, there's a certain very often there's kind of a show off, sort of like a thing about them. And the thing that I loved about that Juilliard sequence was it only occurred to me after the sequence was over. I was like, as I was sitting there, I was like, was that one? Did they do that in one? And I wasn't sure until I went back and watched the film again, but it was just a great stylistic choice for how to tell that particular sequence.
Yeah. And I think, that probably stems from the fact that we really were trying to achieve, a sequence that would have, the ups and downs and the feels of an edited sequence, in the terms of the camera has to be close, has to be wide. We want to be with her at the piano, and then we want to follow her. You want to see the students, So that, I think that probably creates this feeling that it's actually not a Warner in the traditional sense. Ironically, sometimes people tell me they think, because they've heard about some obscure one shot, before they go now, and they sometimes think that the Alice Tully Hall is actually a Warner, which it clearly isn't. But they feel like, it feels like, like real time. And then, so I think that's an interesting thing. By the way, I don't mean to diminish, films that do not allow us to answer questions. I'm just thinking that overall, oftentimes we as, filmmakers or work in the film industry are oftentimes confronted with an assumption that an audience, cannot keep up with us. And I feel that this film is an example that how far you can take people,
Well, and quite frankly, it's, I've seen the film 3 times. I still have questions. Like, who set off the metronome? I don't know. How did that happen?
And does it matter though? That's the thing. Does it matter that we know, or is it just,
right.
That's a long conversation, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
One of the sequences that people have talked to me about after seeing the film, and it's surprisingly short, but it's so shocking, is when Lydia takes her daughter to school and confronts the other child who is bullying her. Yeah. And I noticed, watching the film again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's the first time you go handheld.
It is true. Yeah.
In the film. And so I love that sequence because, again, each one of these sequences gives us very specific, important information about Lydia Tarr's character. And it's just shocking what she says to that child.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about your decision to go handheld and kind of what that says about, each sequence, as I say, is giving us more information about Lydia and what your approach to shooting that sequence tells us about her?
I think what I find probably peculiar, the handheld somehow, I find it interesting that because handheld is such a, tool of choice these days, oftentimes, especially when it comes to, stuff that's been done in streaming environments. And there's always this idea of authenticity that is connected to it, or an immediacy. And I found because we use so little of it, it has more of an unsettling effect. It's like something that goes like something that's a bit weird. And I felt, on the day when we shot this, that that was the direction that Todd really wanted the entire scene to go. So it was, that she felt we were also quite wide angle, very close to her. And it's like as if you're almost forced to be sitting next to somebody who's actually quite mean. That you can't really, there's no way for you to escape this observation that there's something vicious actually for a single second happening, and I thought that was a bit the atmosphere whilst we shot it.
It's an amazing sequence. I wanted to ask you about the character of Krista, who is a very important character in the film that we see only kind of in dream sequences and a very interesting shot at that New Yorker sequence. I feel like, that's her in the foreground here, but we never really see her very clearly. Although she's such an important presence in the film and what she represents to Lydia. Can you talk about your approach to photographing her and especially in those dream sequences, which sort of have a watery sort of effect?
Yeah. That's, again, something that came across. The dream sequences kind of came about through conversations, I guess, that Todd and Kate had, that about wanting to create a different form of visual narrative that would maybe show an inner world, or he always referred to it as motor, like the stuff that keeps the bricks together, so to say. And so that was opposed to the very formal and very structured approach we had on all the other sequences. That was more playful. So we built this box that we would take to every location, and every actor actually that is in the film could enter in there, and they would have these moments together. And it was really improvisational, and Todd would sometimes operate the camera himself, and it was very loose and intimate. And of course, the other way we approached Krista then in the rest of the film was of course extremely formal. So it was very conscious not to show her, only show her from behind, because I think the interesting thing about it is that it happens almost imperceptible. You kind of think, oh, what was that? Oh, somebody killed himself, and suddenly she gets nervous. And she actually doesn't realize. To me, even I'm speaking now as an audience, not as the cinematographer. I always think that, oh yeah, somebody. And then like within 2 or 3 minutes, she goes, oh, well, hold on. And then she goes to her computer and she starts looking up the emails that she has written. So I think this all stems from the fact that we don't really show her, and that she, feels not as a character in that sense, but that everything visually evolves around Lydia Tarr. The film is really her world.
Well, that attention to detail just comes through in the film. I know we're at the end of our time, but I have one final question for you, which was, obviously Lydia Tarr's story ends in a very arresting fashion with her going to the Philippines to do this concert. What was your approach to the Philippines part of the material, and how did it differ from the rest of the film in terms of its look?
Well, I thought, I really embraced the cacophony of lights, and the color. I thought this should really feel like sweat. After all we had the formality of Berlin, but also we had the fall and the winter, so the grayness. And I thought that would be a beautiful thing to throw overboard. And by chance, we finished the shoot in Southeast Asia. So it actually ended there. And we actually did shoot the very last shot of the film that was the very last shot we made. And so as a journey, after all those months, and then to actually go to stand in that heat and the humidity, to have the sunlight, and then also all the out at night when she sits in in the little restaurants and she reads her score, and all of that was just almost the different form of life, a real life, like, let's, for lack of better words, call it real life, something like you open the window and suddenly all the smell comes in, and and you can smell the food and you can feel the heat.
Yeah. Well, what was so powerful for me about that sequence was it really reinforced she's lost the ability to control her environment.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And, there is an interesting thing to be said, because we had a couple of times we had discussions about, how to interpret, even though this was always, we were more practical oftentimes. But there was one time when Todd and I spoke at length about, what is that ending actually, and because you could read it as defeat, but you can also see it as liberation, because she has, even though she has failed in one sense, she has been able to get rid of, the structure that also made her behave the way she did behave, and that she couldn't, she's actually back to where she started, and she can deal with pure music.
That's a very hopeful way of looking at the ending, Florian.
Yeah, but it is a way. It is a way,
Are there any final points that you want to let us know about the cinematography on Tar? Any bits that we did not get to discuss?
No, it was a beautiful conversation. I really hope it's late here, and I've been on these grueling night shoots, and I hope that the things I said made sense.
Florian, you were great, and we are so appreciative. I know that you're look, everything in Iceland at this time of year is a night shoot, right? You've only got 3 or 4 hours of daylight a day?
No, it's actually more now. But I tell you, the strange thing is because I am only shooting night because the story takes place at night, but the light during the day is unbelievable. I mean, if anybody has, put it on the bucket list, the winter light here is just remarkable. It's like the sun, because it never really comes up. So you have these endless blue hours for 3 hours. It's beautiful. It's a bit contradictory because I walk through it to set, but I can't shoot it. So it's like going through a really, really good restaurant, but you're never allowed to go inside.
Well, we look forward. You're working on the new season of True Detective, so we're looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah,
for sure. Florian, thank you so much. I know this is your one day off a week. I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us about Tar. I love this film, and I'm so thrilled that you've gotten your first Academy Award nomination for it, and hopefully this is the first of many to come. So, Florian, thank you again for coming on and talking to us.
Thanks for your interest. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Many thanks to Florian and the entire team behind Tar. And thank you again to all of the nominees who joined us today. Best of luck to all of you on March 12th at the Dolby Theater. You can find links to the films we've discussed today in our show notes, and they are all available in stunning Dolby Vision. Also in our show notes is a link to our previous episode with each of the nominees in the Best Sound category. But before you go, please make sure you're subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute Podcast. We have many more exciting episodes coming up, which you will not want to miss. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thank you for joining us. This is the Dolby Institute Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon, production support by Taylor Hines, and our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.